Um, so I know a number of you. My name is Sean Filer. I am the chairman of the American Principles Project, and I'm very pleased to have you here today, to be able to host you here today for the introduction of George Gilder's new book, The 21st Century Case for Gold, A New Information Theory of Money. We have a copy for each of you. As you leave, there are 140 copies, which I'm sure is more than the people here. But I want to start by giving you a little background for why the American Principles Project is sponsoring this event and why we think this merits your attention and why we think this is really an important policy discussion. So to put this into context for the American Principles Project, we were started 7 years ago on a very simple idea, kind of the name gives it away, is that we were having an impoverished debate in America politically, is that we were talking about policy, not about principle. We were reducing ideas to kind of their most practical form instead of talking in ways that the founders would have talked about, instead of talking at a higher level and elevating the debate. I think at the time we didn't really fully recognize the extent to which this was really a path that the Republicans had set on, but not the Democrats. The Democrats were taking small ideas and making them big, winning elections and implementing the policies. The Republicans were taking big ideas and making them small, winning elections and not implementing the policies. So we had this series of elections over the last 30 years where we won half the time, the Republicans won half the time, the Democrats won half the time, and the agenda was the Democratic agenda, and things just kept getting worse. Government kept getting bigger, and so what was happening? Just winning the next election didn't seem like the solution. There was a bigger problem. So let me give you a sense in terms of what I mean, and I'm going to bring this back to money here pretty quickly so it makes sense in this context. Democrats would take a little idea like whether or not nuns are prescribing contraception, and they will go to the mat. And gosh, we have problems in America. It's not clear that this was the most pressing problem, but they would go to the mat on an issue of principle over exactly this. In this case, they lost, but they were willing to get into a suit with the Catholic Church over this issue. It's unbelievable. You take Republicans and you give them a big issue. Let's say immigration, right? That's a big issue. This goes right to the heart of what America's about. And they say, well, it's secure the borders, and it's about a better workforce. We want higher qualified workers. At the end of the day, it's kind of really about money. It's about GDP growth. What's our workforce going to look like? The underlying principle is, if you ask them, and they'll say, well, the underlying principle is we want new people to come to America so that they can make the people that are already here richer. Okay, well, let's not do principle in that case, right? Let's do what else? Let's take education, right? We had a big debate about education in America over Common Core. This became a cause célèbre, not just in Iowa, but in New York. And again, you go back and you ask the field, what is this really about? And well, it's about training this workforce. It's about having better educated people that can grow America, make our country more competitive against Korea. So again, they bring it back to money. They take a big idea about calling the purpose of life, and they make it about money. So then, all things being equal, we say, well, what if we actually ask them about money, right? Because that's what they're trying to talk about when we're talking about immigration and education. What if we actually ask Republicans about money? What's the really big principle? And now everybody doesn't want to talk, right? So now it's, well, oh gosh, this is the one thing none of us have experience with, because this is the one thing we've delegated to the experts. Jim Grant's, I think, perfectly apt phrase, the PhD standard here captures what policy is. So we have all of these politicians that have no experience with monetary policy, that want nothing really to do with it, have no programmatic solution, and so they offer us nothing. And so when I look at this program within APP, in many ways, this goes to the heart of the problem. We have a topic that is ever present, that no one is ever really able to elevate to the point of principle. What is the purpose of money? What can it do? What can it not do? Can it make GDP grow faster? Can it create jobs or no? And if so, what are the limitations and what should we have? And this is exactly what George has, I think, done brilliantly here in this book. And there's no better person to introduce him, to my mind, than Jim Grant, who has been talking and writing eloquently and elegantly about money now for the better part of 30 years. 100 years, it seems longer. Um, he talks like a writer, which I love, is that his newsletters, the Grants Interest Rate Observer that he started in 1983, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, is one of the most noticeably well-written publications that I read. He is also a historian. He's being awarded tonight the Hayek Prize by the Manhattan Institute. Larry Moen's here. This is incredibly good judgment, Larry. The book is The Forgotten Depression. It's good enough to both be commended by the Manhattan Institute and criticized kind of shallowly by the New York Times. So that's high praise indeed. So Jim, if you would, please come up and introduce George.
Well, thank you, Sean, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What a pleasure it is indeed to introduce George Gilder, the George Gilder, a kaleidoscopic protean, a man for all decades, certainly all recent decades, conservative sex books in the 70s, Wealth and Poverty and President Reagan and the Republic of America in the 1980s, Microchips and Qualcomm in the 1990s, Intelligent Design, Knowledge and Power, and Israel and God in the 2000s. And now comes the 21st Century Case for Gold, a New Information Theory of Money. Now here is a brilliant and delectable treatise on what money is and what it is not. Now, what it is, George observes, is a measuring stick. What it is not, Federal Reserve, please copy, is a magic wand. I got an advanced copy of the proofs, and I spent hours of pleasurable and thoughtful reading. I pay this my highest compliment. I couldn't stop posting it. For all the aphorisms and all the brilliant thinking in here. So this book, I think, is truly important, and its author is truly delightful. George has unconvincingly ascribed his investment success mainly to luck, with a residuum to overconfidence and, quote, my prowess at the Blarney box. So George, please step up to the Blarney box.
Jim, thank you. I mean, it is a great honor to be introduced by Sean and then by Jim Grant, who's the best writer of economics. He's the John Kenneth Galbraith who actually gets everything right. It's sort of an inverted version of John Kenneth Galbraith with the same wit and wonderful elegance of style, and this unerring insight, what Neil Stephenson in one of the books calls upsight, which is really beyond insight. It's a visionary grasp of the integrated a range of phenomena in the world. And I mean, there's so many friends here that I can't really recite them all, but I should mention Steve Forbes, who propelled me on this course. Because I have to say, when I began in Wealth and Poverty, I didn't quite know what I thought about gold. I circled around it, I probed it, I looked at it, 79 protons. I wondered why gold had its really magical record as the monetary element. And it never quite worked for me until I really began to scrutinize gold in the guise of information policy. information theory. And I spent 20 years in Silicon Valley and around Silicon Valley studying information theory as a way to understand Qualcomm and all the Intel and all the companies of Silicon Valley. And then it suddenly struck me that information theory, because it defines information as surprise, provided a way of capturing entrepreneurial creativity within an economic model. And all the reductionist schemes that people apply to economics fail because they fail to capture creativity. And Claude Shannon, the real founder of information theory, along with von Neumann and Gödel and Turing, defined information as unexpected bits, as surprise. And in Wealth and Poverty, I recalled that I had quoted Albert Hirschman of Princeton. And Albert Hirschman said, creativity always comes as a surprise to us. If it didn't, we wouldn't need it. And socialism would work. I added that line. And so here we have creativity as the essence of entrepreneurship, and we have surprise as and creativity defined by surprise, and information defined by surprise. And then the next step was to identify wealth. Entrepreneurship is really creativity and surprise. Profit is surprise. Profit and loss are the unexpected returns. The average returns are captured by the interest rate. So you move from entrepreneurship and human creativity and the image of his creator as surprise, and then you identify wealth as knowledge. And we know wealth is knowledge because, as Thomas Sowell told us decades ago, the Neanderthal in his cave had all the material resources we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age is entirely the accumulation of knowledge. So wealth is knowledge. And then the question is, how is this knowledge created? What is growth? And growth is learning. I've been preoccupied with learning curves and all for most of my life as a writer. I'd encountered them with Bill Bain decades ago when he called me and said I'd greatly underestimated the impact of lowering taxes, tax rates, and prices. That the impact of lower prices was much more dynamic and complicated and cascades through the economy in a much more powerful way than I expected. Well, learning curves are ubiquitous in the economy. And what learning curves tell you is that deflation, as it were, is the fundamental condition of capitalism. Learning curves tell you that for every doubling of total units sold, you get a 20 to 30% drop in costs. And this is, so capitalism is based on steadily declining costs and prices. Or another way of putting it, steadily expanding value. Well, and all the inflation numbers we have, all these scrutiny of prices that preoccupy the press are mostly bogus. Prices go down, value goes up, and as a result of learning, and that's the heart of capitalist economics. Well, if capitalism is constantly producing new learning and abundance, what remains scarce when everything else grows abundant? What remains scarce when everything else grows abundant is the residual resource, and that residual resource is time. So if money, as Steve Forbes had taught me for years and years, is a measuring stick, how can it be a measuring stick if it's part of what it measures? It has to have a root outside the system itself. This is a fundamental principle of information theory established by Gilder in a paper which was really the most important breakthrough in 20th century philosophy and logic, when he showed that any logical system is necessarily dependent on truths outside that system that cannot be reduced to the system. If you're going to have a measuring stick of economic activity, it can't be part of this economic activity. So this was confusing to me because people kept talking of gold as if it was money because it was valuable outside of its role as money. And somehow this confused me, how gold could be both part of the economy and the measuring stick of economic activity. And I really didn't get the key until Mike Kendall, I think, was the guy who really brought my attention to this idea of money as time. It gave a quote from Jude Winniski, who was all over this argument, and it allowed me to see that the reason gold is valuable and foundational is not because it has economic value, but because it doesn't have economic value. Really. As money, it's rooted in time because it nullifies capital and technology. Really, through happenstance, historically, gold has become more difficult to extract and more costly to find and deliver in proportion as technology of mining has become more advanced. And that, thus, gold has nullified capital and technology, leaving itself as a manifestation of the time and a measure of the time that it takes to extract it. So it becomes a pure measure of time. And then, going back to Silicon Valley, I encountered Bitcoin, where Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a brilliant paper preoccupied with how to separate Bitcoin from the economy and make it a pure manifestation of time. That's essentially what the original Bitcoin paper is doing. He understood, as Nick Szabo, his colleague and possible avatar, has also focused on this reality. So wealth is knowledge, growth is learning, and money is time. And those are the real foundations of an information theory of the economy. And it's the same theory that also underlies all the triumphs of computer science and microchips and bioengineering and most of the great advances in the economy over the last decades have been through the power of information theory, beginning with Gilder, who was identified by John von Neumann and who in turn translated it into computer science, with Turing, who immortally declared that a computer could not be, is necessarily dependent on an oracle outside the computer. There's no way that the computer itself can become a mind or a brain. You can't, the mind cannot be reduced to computation. And he was asked, well, what can this oracle be? And he said, well, the only thing I can say about the oracle is that it cannot be a machine. It must be a human being. It must transcend the system. And human creativity, which always comes as a surprise to us and echoes the creativity at the foundation of the universe, is the creativity of the Creator, is the foundation of all economics and wealth and growth and truth. Thank you.
We're going to take some questions here to kind of flush out, I think, what are some very important and also nuanced ideas that George has put forward here in this book. So why don't we start? And if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll send out a mic so the whole room can hear. Allegra has the mic over there.
Jim was going to question me.
Oh, is Jim going to question you?
Jim?
Is that the, Jim? What do you want to, you had some?
I was confused.
Oh, okay. Why don't we start with a couple questions? Well, Jim, no, let's stop there. Do you have questions prepared for George?
Well,
Come on. This is even a better idea. Do you two want chairs?
What?
No, I just asked one.
Go to the mic.
No.
Yeah, please.
I didn't read it. It's a cold day in June when I'm going to share a rostrum with George Gilder. Some of these, as Sean mentioned, George, some of these ideas are very nuanced indeed, and I want to ask you to kind of reduce some of them to the here and now, to ask you about the distinction one might draw between current monetary affairs, which is kind of a command and control from the top. Interest rates will be such and such. Asset prices will lift at this appropriate rate, versus the regime you have hinted at, in my manuscript at least, which is one of spontaneous social action, which I think speaks to some of the American principles involved. So how would a world look from the monetary point of view if the ideas you described for us were implemented practically?
In the book, I discussed this as through my experience with Milton Friedman, debating money with Milton Friedman in China. And Milton was arguing that in order for China really to grow, the crucial thing was it had to get control of its monetary policy. And my idea, it just seemed to me alien to have a libertarian economist in China telling communists to take control of their monetary policy, their money supply. And I didn't know quite what was wrong with this, but I knew there was something wrong with it. And I said, let a billion flowers bloom, which, and we never really, and Milton said inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, and so it went through the streets of Shanghai. And the heart of it is that the government doesn't control the money supply, really, doesn't control money, can't control money, because the MVPT Milton said M rules, and M doesn't rule, V rules. V is velocity, and if velocity is unstable, the government can't control money. Individuals and investors and the people really control the money, and there's nothing the government can do about it. So all it's pumping up money supply and pumping it down or whatever they do is utterly futile and feckless, and actually destroys wealth by inhibiting learning. So, you can't control the money supply. The other great contribution Milton made was floating currencies. And a lot of people imagine that floating currencies, they're the alternative to a gold standard, or really this combination of a gold standard and a Bitcoin standard for the internet that I expound in the paper. But I just, yeah, I'm talking too long. But but the key thing about floating rates, it's supposed to be more efficient than gold, because gold is wasteful in its mining processes. Floating rates are 100 times more voluminous, entail foreign exchange 100 times more voluminous than all the stock markets in the world put together, and 20 times more voluminous than all the trade in goods and services. $5.4 trillion every 24 hours, and they don't produce a measuring stick, because the floating rates are a lot more volatile than the of economic activities they supposedly govern. So you got to get away from floating rates. They close down the horizons of the economy.
George, do you? It seems to me that one of the problems that people who advocate these ideas not nearly so well as you have, it's who attempt to promote these very ideas, they run into a problem of seeming anachronism. 90 years ago, 1925, Britain went on the gold standard but didn't really do it. 100 years ago, the world went off the gold standard. All of this is in the ancient past. You are a visionary of technology, and what's exciting to me to hear you is that you are integrating the notions of technology with what many assume to be an irrelevant and obsolete monetary past. So how do you suggest that we proceed with the vocabularies, with the rhetoric of money, trying to integrate people, so we say, younger than we are?
Well, I think Bitcoin is the new layer, the transactions layer for the internet stack. And Bitcoin has the same root of its value that gold has, and I believe that the price of Bitcoin will converge with the price of gold. And so I make the case for gold as I make the case for Bitcoin. Gold is obviously more important than Bitcoin today, with internet commerce just 6% of all global commerce, and Bitcoin a tiny share of internet commerce, and other alternative currencies related to Bitcoin also experimenting. But I believe that the internet drastically needs a transactions layer so that it can do micropayments and thus return the power over content on the internet to the actual producers of the content from the aggregators of content. And so I think that this move toward a new money will both transform the internet while it transforms the world economy and brings a new era of prosperity and cultural uplift to the world.
Hey, George, one more question before we open up to the audience, and that is, there seem to be two schools of thought among those who believe that the idea of demonetizing the Fed is a good idea. One school of thought holds that there ought to be a national approach, or indeed a global approach, to redefining money as a weight of something. Seth Lipsky, who is here, has talked about the constitutional approach. That's one idea. Another idea is a kind of a Hayekian discovery process in which individuals, freed perhaps from sales tax and other considerations on gold, such inhibiting considerations, will themselves find, through price discovery, through the discovery of entrepreneurship, find a money, and it will not be a national or a global effort, but rather a social effort. How do you see that, those distinctions?
I think we should move on both paths. The second path, the spontaneous process, is underway. I mean, it's. I think it was a tremendous breakthrough to have the entire internet economy currently preoccupied with BitGold. That's what Bitcoin and all these alternative currencies reflect. They began as BitGold. And so we have this movement underway, and at some point I believe we'll be more interested in the value of dollars in bitcoins than bitcoins in dollars. And similarly, the world, I think, is increasingly recognizes the necessity of a return to a gold Polaris. As Nathan Lewis, Mark.
Yeah, Mark Skousen. So I'm kind of surprised by your title, The 21st Century Case for Gold. Shouldn't you have entitled it The 21st Century Case for Bitcoin? Because so my question is, are there any advantages that Bitcoin has over gold, such as transaction costs? That's a serious, and storage problems.
Yeah.
That's the reason, one of the primary reasons Milton Friedman rejected the gold standard was the transaction costs, the storage costs, the digging of gold out of the ground and stuff. You don't have any of those problems with Bitcoin. So my question is, why did you choose gold over Bitcoin in your title when it seems like you're talking a lot about Bitcoin and you are an expert in that field?
I think that gold is the monetary element, and Bitcoin has to challenge it through a model that essentially imitates and attempts to reproduce what gold already offers us. So we understand that you can have a gold standard with very little gold. There's Nathan Lewis's book does a eloquent description of ETFs involving gold, which with virtually no gold involved. Gold is the incarnation of value that for the reasons, because it's rooted in the ultimate source of value, time, which can't be stolen or hoarded, which is distributed equally, which remains scarce when everything else grows abundant. And so I don't see a conflict between the two. I think that Bitcoin as a global money on the internet will steadily gain significance, and more commerce will occur on the internet, and there will be some kind of evolution of the two prices, and we'll have Bitcoin and gold, and BitGold.
George. Bob, I got it. Bob, I'll go first, then you. Bob. First, thank you so much for writing this magnificent piece. It's really a great contribution. Brief
Well,
comment.
thank you, Larry. You too. I spoke to your group, which really challenged me with many objections and ideas, and really gave me a big push on this course that I've been on.
Well, you've outdone yourself with this one. A couple of brief comments. Firstly, I want to address how the monetary system gets reformed, and I want to compliment you for opening the door in a way that I don't know that a lot of people will appreciate. And one of the important things of overcoming the irredeemable paper ticket money is to discredit those people who have promoted it. Primarily, that would be Milton Friedman.
As what?
You have to discredit the paper money, and really to discredit those people who have promoted it. And right at the top of that list is Milton Friedman, and you have opened the door to that. And you are an established, very respected, perhaps the most respected intellectual to challenge Milton Friedman and actually say he's wrong. And he's more than wrong.
Well, Milton Friedman acknowledged that he was wrong at the end of his life on this particular issue. Milton Friedman was right about most things, but he got this crippling experience in Stockholm when he was awarded the Nobel Prize, and thus, like most Nobel laureates, suffered intellectual sclerosis, which applied particularly to the errors, which are always enshrined in Nobel Prizes. They find the errors and then award the prizes for the errors.
That's a kind way to put it. I wouldn't be so kind. The second thing that you have in this book, which also shows the way to how to implement a change, when you talk about how you and Milton Friedman were in China, and you mentioned now as well that he said to Mao that he should get hold of the monetary system. And it is commonly understood, and I hosted a dinner once for Bob Mundell, and he said that every country reserves the right to establish whatever kind of monetary system they want. And the answer to that is not in this country. In this country, the sovereignty over the monetary system is with the people. And the only powers that are authorized to the government, to the politicians, is to coin money, to borrow money, and the states are required to make a payment in gold and silver coin. And so I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
I haven't had the pleasure yet of reading your book. I haven't had the pleasure yet of reading your book, so I'm just looking at the title and the subtitle. And the subtitle is A New Information Theory of Money. And gold obviously conveys information, and I think that's part of what you're driving at. The typical cliche of the canary in the coal mine. Now, if that is true, and gold conveys very important information to the marketplace, and those people operating within a so-called free market, which of course no longer exists, wouldn't there be an incentive to try to interrupt that conduit of information so that the market can't get that information, and by suppressing the price of gold, stop that information from flowing?
I think that manipulating the gold market is a fool's errand. There are a lot of fools in the world, but I don't think it's really feasible over any. Hi, Dan. How are
Daniel
you?
Berninger, I'd add my voice as a fan. One of the challenges we have right now is to be optimistic about good ideas. It seems like we have very low capacity to implement good ideas in the country. About 20 years ago, you wrote that the tension was between the transition between the industrial age and the knowledge age with the Magna Carta, with Toffler and Esther Dyson. Do you still feel that way, that we're kind of at this moment of tension, and is there an update?
I think so. I think that this is a transition toward an economy where machines that generate and manipulate information are the chief vessels of new value, and that convergence in the economy allows us to see the role of information not only in the form of data, but also information as the foundation of mind and in the universe.
This is a more simplistic question. If information is wealth,
Knowledge is wealth.
knowledge is wealth, and if the media is a dominant means of providing knowledge and information, why is the media dead broke?
It's good. Well, I'm writing a book about the media really will be disintermediated, is the crucial, by micropayments. And that's an important development. Today, I'm also working on a project called Life After Google. And Google is an aggregator, and it's 95% of all of its revenues come from advertising, most of which the viewers don't want to see. Does anybody ever welcome the ad on a YouTube video? Free is bad. Free returns the economy to barter. And we want to get back to money, and real money. Gene?
Gene Epstein from Barron's, a member of the dying media, amazingly enough. The magazine I write for is making record profits and record volume in terms of dollars. I don't know how the heck we do it, probably because they have me writing for them.
I'm sure that's right.
Yeah, who's been inspired by George Gilder. And my favorite book of George's, I always have to say this, is The Spirit of Enterprise. It reveals that George could have been a great historian. He tells wonderful stories in that book and makes a very good, excellent points about key points, seminal points about the value of enterprise. The question I want to ask is actually picking up on Mark Skousen's question involving Bitcoin. George, I think you're missing one point that all my young friends, my son writes about Bitcoin, that you're missing. Transmittals, that there's an enterprise now that's working on the $500 billion in transmittals that poor people make to third world countries, to their relatives, and that they're getting bilked by I guess it's Western Union, and Bitcoin transfers could work for them. And you can go to the grocery store with your cell phone, which is the new computer, and you can buy groceries with your Bitcoin. So therefore, it's not just for computerized transactions. Just picking up on the point, there's a lot of actually animosity between the gold advocates and the Bitcoin advocates, and you're saying, well, you guys should just love each other because you're both working in the same enterprise. But actually, wouldn't it be possible that Bitcoin will ultimately dominate the world and that gold will lose out? That's my question.
Well, the gold isn't going to go away. I mean, I think that there's going to be a convergence of Bitcoin and gold. And I will say, I've spoken now at probably 8 or 9 Bitcoin conferences, and there's great sympathy and understanding of gold at Bitcoin conferences. That Bitcoin is not an enemy of gold. It is a path through which the new generation is coming to recognize the value of stable money, and recognize the importance of gold. It was BitGold was the prototype for Bitcoin.
Thanks, George. I'd like to put in a word for Men and Marriage is my favorite book. and therefore maybe bring the conversation down for some of us slow learners in the room. But Jim Graham spoke of one of the reasons that gold, it's hard for people to take gold seriously because it's considered anachronistic. And the outside influence of Milton Friedman has also been raised as a kind of barrier. And in my experience in just looking at the debate, particularly as exemplified by Paul Krugman in the New York Times, the principal intellectual barrier right now is the idea that the only possible negative effect of bad monetary policy is inflation. And since we don't seem to have massive inflation, that disproves the idea that there's anything wrong with current monetary policy. And I wonder if you might want to speak to what are some, if you get out of the monetarist creed and look at the new information theory model, what are some of the bad effects of monetary policy?
Well, I always am amazed to hear economists reduce the whole economy to inflation or deflation. It's just, we're at a period when many of the smartest of our intellectual luminaries believe that capitalism has come to the end of the line. I mean, Peter Thiel, who's the greatest investor in the world today, I believe, says that it's a lot easier today to imagine utter catastrophe and global return to the wilderness than a return to steady and creative growth. In the United States today, there's a lower level of entrepreneurship than for decades. I mean, for the first time, entrepreneurship is actually declining. New business formation and the willingness of young people to envisage themselves as entrepreneurs is actually in the doldrums. The numbers of this are quite shocking in this regard. We flatter ourselves that the stock market is prosperous when it's chiefly an effect of buying in $24 billion of your own shares every, week or what? Hours, whatever it is. And IPOs have largely evaporated. And when I started out, there were 22 IPOs for every merger and acquisition. Today, there are 7 merger and acquisitions for every IPO. Big companies are buying in their rivals, and small companies are angling to be absorbed by the companies they challenge. The middle class is in the soup. I don't like that language, but it's politically potent, And it's just the idea that the economy is working great, as Paul Krugman imagines, and the only flaw is inadequate money creation, seems to me to be more than delusional. We're in a crisis where people actually can envisage the end of capitalism. So I think it's a sufficiently dramatic moment to motivate a concern with the root of the crisis, or an important root, which is global manipulation of the measuring stick, as Steve defines it, and which means that all the houses are falling down.
So we have time for one more question.
Carl Golovin, a question about Apple and also Global Star, a company you wrote about long ago. Apple apparently, under the guise of their new gold watch, I've read they've acquired control over a large amount of gold production in the years ahead. Of course, they also have an Apple Pay system. Might it be they're looking to create a private label monetary unit that could be gold related? And could even Global Star's wireless coverage of the world facilitate the velocity of such money?
Well, that's a good point. You said it.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I hope all of you will take the time to read this book, and the profundity of this idea that money is time is something that's, is I think a very deep philosophical concept, a little hard to get your head around, but I think has some very real and lasting real-world implications, which I want to give everybody a little dose of now. We have found that at the American Principles Project that this bifurcation whereby you have academics that write white papers that go on shelves, and you have other people that give money that goes into campaigns that win elections, that actually structurally doesn't work well. And what you want to do is you want to bring the two of those things together, which through our C3 and our C4 and our Super PAC we try to do. And so it matters more when you have a good idea, when you have the right principle, when you've made the right argument, if there's a political reality to that argument. And we're very fortunate today to have an individual who has done more to connect these two ideas, to connect money and politics, I think, than almost anyone else. Steve Forbes, who I was reading his bio on the last night, and the list of things that he's done is unbelievable. He's basically done things that everybody knows needed to be done, but everybody was afraid to do. You cut taxes. You helped cut taxes in New Jersey. Thank God for that. There's still more to do. As a resident of New Jersey, ran for president twice. Has given us the enduring gift of the flat tax, which any observer of the current political contest in the Republican Party will know of the enduring legacy of that very, very good idea that is still a very big part of the current debate about taxation, and has elevated monetary policy in politics over and over again, specifically gold and the gold standard. So we are all, I think, even if we don't know it, very indebted to Steve, and I'm very happy you're here today. Steve, if you would come up and please say a couple words about George's book, your thoughts on this, the thoughts on gold. We'll look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you very much, Sean, for those very kind words. I think the real debt goes to George Gilder, people like Jude Winniski, who started these campaigns way back in the 1970s and 1980s. And want to thank Jim Grant for your questions and for your introduction. So Sean and Jim, thank you. George, thank you, and thank all of you. I'm delighted for my free lunch today. Saying a few words is no payment at all for anyone who's been in politics. But what I think the significance of what George has done is that we've now become part of his voyage of discovery. He has fresh eyes and is giving a new perspective. I never thought of entropy related to monetary policy, but he has given it a wider perspective. And by properly placing sound money in the context of time, in the internet with information theory, by giving a proper analysis of the Bitcoin phenomenon, George will be drawing others to this absolutely critical subject. This is a moral subject, and George hit on it. The blunt truth is, you can get taxes right, you can get regulations right, you can get spending right, but if you don't get the money right, if you don't get monetary policy right, you will be in trouble, because money does convey information. Now, in the 80s and 90s, we sort of had what you might call a sort of right, semi-sloppy, but sort of right monetary policy for much of the 80s and 90s. Give it a C minus. Given after the 70s, that was pretty good. We saw phenomenal things happen. Strong foreign and military policy. We won the Cold War, opening up vast swaths of the world to the glories of entrepreneurial capitalism. We saw trade and the flows of capital reach, as a proportion of the global economy, levels not seen since 1913. 1913. Taxes were cut. The Brits did it first, but not quite right. Reagan did it, and by golly, 50 countries followed suit. So privatizations, we learned that word. The idea of government disgorging assets instead of gobbling them up. And 1913, 1914 is critical, because these advances that we saw come to fruition in the 80s and 90s. We now saw in the last 15 years, these are precarious if people don't understand money, if prevailing economic theories are wrong. If those theories are wrong, inevitably, civilization will have threatening crises as we have today. They will erupt, and malignant political forces will rise up. We saw this in the 1930s. We saw it again in the 1970s. We're seeing it again today. People get the sense that people in government don't know what to do, just as they had that sense in the 1930s. And so as these people, they don't know what to do, so they clutch ever more tightly to their idols and false gods. David Malpass, which George references in his paper, David Malpass has pointed to the quantitative easing, which they thought is stimulation, actually is crushing the economy, the equivalent of draining blood from an anemic patient and hurting the creation of small and new businesses, hurting the poor and middle class. And I share George's distaste for this Marxist terminology, but that's the way it is today. And George understands and will be able to convince other people to understand that money is not in and of itself wealth. It is not a tool to guide economies like central planners envision. Economists have it backwards, proverbial cart before the horse. As George understood, money measures value. It is that measuring stick, just as clocks measure time, scales measure weight, and rulers measure length. And just as imagine, as we've done, and I've done it before, imagine if the Fed was in charge of clocks. Imagine floating clocks. Imagine how chaotic that would be. 60 minutes an hour one day, 48 the next, 92 the day after. Imagine baking a cake. It says bake the batter 40 minutes. Well, you have to think, is that nominal minutes? Inflation-adjusted minutes? Is it a New York minute, a Mexican minute? And so as George explains in this new book, money should be what he calls low entropy, a conveyor of information and nothing more. And so, and think of it, be simplistic, it's a claim on products and services, just like a coat check in a restaurant's a claim on the coat. So a restaurant would no more think that by creating more coat checks, that'll stimulate the production of coats and therefore more customers. But that, in essence, the thinking passes for economic thinking in the world today, coat check theory. So, and sadly, what they're doing is infinitely more harmful than a restaurant that gets it wrong. Because as George points out, unstable money hurts the greatest conveyor of information, which is prices, how people value things. You know, it signals, it enables us to see what people want or don't want. It enables us to invest. Prices are absolutely essential. But unstable money corrupts that information like a virus in a computer, corrupts the information. We saw that in the 70s, when oil went from $3 to $40 a barrel. Everyone thought the price is going up, nominal price, therefore we must be running out of this stuff. We had the same phenomenon in the last decade. Oh, we're running out of this stuff. Need alternative energies. Price signal was wrong, was corrupted. We saw it in housing. Housing prices were going up. So what happens when you have unstable money to base your money? Well, but people saw prices going up. I must not have enough houses. So we churned out more and more houses, invented a new mortgage, which was, why have an income? You know, who needs it? Value just keeps going up. Doesn't matter if you default. Doesn't matter. So it hurts investing, as Nathan and others have pointed out, John and others have pointed out, hurts investing in the things that are unseen. And George is right. Wealth is knowledge. And it harms that creation of knowledge. As George points out, how in the world did we get out of caves? We learned to trade with each other. And trading involved money makes that easier, facilitates learning and the creation of knowledge. So, as George says, money transcends determinism and enables creativity and freedom. And this is where something that we have to come to grips with. George does it with the one area where Milton Friedman didn't get it right till the end of his life, even though he got so many other things right. And that is classical economists. They recognize, truthfully, that you have the real economy and money is the symbol economy. But they also saw, and George makes reference to this with Adam Smith, but you saw with Isaac Newton and others, they saw the economy as a machine, as a clock, and therefore it's something that could be managed like a clock, even though they believed in laissez-faire and the like. And you see it in that hideous word in economics, and Mark, don't throw up on this, equilibrium. And they saw the economy as a smooth running thing. And then you get exogenous events like a hurricane or a tsunami or an earthquake. And they saw entrepreneurship and inventions as exogenous events. So you get a disruption, then you go back to equilibrium. This obsession with perfect competition. Joseph Schumpeter thought this was nonsense. He thought the entrepreneur was not an exogenous event, but absolutely central to an economy, as does George. Constant flux, constantly changing. And so when you look at Marx, you look at Keynes, you look at the Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize winner, not the Milton Friedman we all know in other areas, they were not, in terms of classical economics, they were heretics. They all still believed in equilibrium, that you could control the economy. They saw it as a machine. Schumpeter, in that sense, was the infidel. He didn't believe in the whole thing at all. Now, Keynes reversed what the classical economists thought. He thought the symbols controlled the economy. The symbol economy was the real economy. He had disdain for entrepreneurs, little respect for them. He saw them as circus animals, animal spirits. You give them treats and they'll do certain things at certain times. Got to control them. So even though Schumpeter later had flaws, as George has outlined in his other books later in life, he did get the big thing right, creative destruction. And this, George touches on this in a way in the book on interest. This idea that we have equilibrium, interest then becomes an extraction, a surplus, kind of taking something that really doesn't belong to you. But George points out it is not that at all. So did Schumpeter with profits. If you believe in equilibrium, there's no justification for profit other than as a bribe to get you to do something. But Schumpeter realized profit is not a surplus or something out there. Profit is a cost of doing business. If you're constantly destroying old capital, you need to replace that old capital. You need to have the capital, the creation, the resources to do these new things, discover new things, and then bring them to fruition. See it in our business, the print business. Barron's is a happy exception, but that industry is a fraction of its value of a few years ago. You saw it in the New York Times. Bought the Boston Globe and a few other Massachusetts newspapers, $1.2 billion, sold it a few years later for $200 million. $1 billion of destroyed capital. You have to replace that. That's what profit is. It's a cost of doing business in a dynamic society. So George gets it right on the interest when he talks about the time value of money. And he says, recognizing that money translates to time would make interest payments as obviously as legitimate as they are. So while the Democrats always accuse conservatives of wars against women and everything else, how about a war against time? They're waging war against time. So, in George's wonderful description of gold, which he just gave us, in terms of the crust of the earth, why it makes it a unique thing. to have that fixed sense of measurement. So George's journey is our journey, and it is a crucial journey. As he points out, IPOs versus mergers and acquisitions, new companies versus companies closing. This is not just about GDP and the traditional ways of looking at the economy. This gets the essence of civilization itself. Already, government is making more and more parts of the economy its clients. They recognize socialists were idiots in the sense they thought you had to take things over. No, you just put in regulations that make their survival dependent on you. You see it with banks. You see it with healthcare. Now they're even grabbing the internet. Now they want to tell us how many minutes we should take a shower in California. And don't think that is not going to become to the rest of the world. Oh, we're running out of water. Better not take showers. Better not go to work because it's going to smell. But anyway, put that aside. But the fact of the matter is, this gets the essence of our whole being, our able to do things. Recognizing money is about information. Money is a claim on products and services. Money comes from us. Money was originally invented in the marketplace to make doing trade with one another easier. It wasn't invented by government. As soon as it was invented, government grasped it, as it naturally would do. So this is a turning point. And this is why it's so exciting to have somebody with George's brilliance make this journey, not understanding at the beginning, but understanding that something's not quite right to say money controls everything. And then take this journey and be able to relate it to high technology, to the Bitcoin, to the millennials. This is how we're going to win the argument. He's given it a new dimension to basic principles, and therefore play a key role in saving Western civilization. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Steve, very much. I know you don't have to work for your lunch, so we really appreciate you coming here. It is a turning point. I think, George's timing here is really perfect. We're at the end of 6 years of zero interest rate policy and an endless debate about whether interest rates are going to go up or down 25 or 50 basis points. It should be a constant reminder, I think, to all of us, as it is basically to anybody watching, that kind of all's not well. Right? There is this enormous stress that's coinciding with the political cycle, that is coinciding, I think, with our side finding some of the right arguments, which really does, I think, create a real ripeness, particularly in this cycle, particularly in the large field we have on the Republican side, to elevate, to bring monetary policy back into politics, to have a grown-up discussion, I think is a probability, not just a possibility. We've worked very hard towards that. I'm going to invite up Steve Lonegan here, former mayor of Bogota and gubernatorial and senatorial candidate in New Jersey, who has put together a conference in Jackson Hole, Wyoming this August that he's going to tell you about, that I think will give you some sense in terms of the opportunity there is to bring monetary policy and our monetary system and discussion of it back into politics. And that'll be, with that, we'll close. So Steve, if you would come up, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean, very much. My title at American Principles Project is Director of Monetary Policy. But I want to tell you, I'm not responsible for the nation's monetary policy. I didn't direct it. But I would like to show you something. I'll tell you about Jackson Hole. I like props. This is an American silver dollar. It's a beautiful piece, and I hope when you're done, you'll come up and take a look at this. This is a silver dollar as envisioned by Alexander Hamilton in the Coinage Act of 1792 that was passed by Congress and signed into law by George Washington. It would be our American dollar for almost the next 200 years. This American silver dollar is a beautiful piece. This one I'm holding happens to be in 1899. Contained 3/4 of an ounce just about of silver. And it's a gorgeously done piece, and it has a serrated edge. The reason the silver dollar has a serrated edge is so that somebody couldn't skim some silver off the edge of it and demean its value. This silver dollar would be representation of our value, and it was backed by 20 of these, which actually bounced as well backed by gold. Under the Coinage Act, 1 ounce of gold was $20. And this was our American money. And the old U.S. dollars, up until recently, United States Treasury notes, under the picture of George Washington, it would say redeem for $1 because you could redeem it for this real coin of real silver. If in 1960 you took a U.S. silver dollar and a paper dollar, you could go out and buy 3 gallons of gas with either one. And if you put them in a drawer and then today you took out that paper dollar, you'd buy not even half a gallon of gas, but your silver dollar would buy about 5 gallons of gas. That's what they've done to the value of our money. Because today, folks, what the U.S. Mint coins is this thing here. This is a U.S. dollar coin. It's made of something, I think it's like a magnesium or tin. It's coated by some shiny substance. When they mint it, it has a serrated edge, but it wears off very quickly because it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it has no value. Somebody says it's worth a pen, not even, you can't even melt it. Look, this is the bauble. They've reduced our American money to baubles. And it's kind of appropriate. We're here on the Manhattan Island where the legend is that the Dutch bought this island from Indians for some shiny baubles. This is a shiny bauble. That's what they've done to our measure of our life savings and our time. They tamed it into a debased bauble, and we're seeing it in the widening income gap and the economic distortions of today's market. And it's time we took this issue of what they call monetary policy, and Luman Lamon, who's been a leader in this issue, famously says that it was called the currency debate up until around the 1950s when the PhDs that Jim Grant talks about took it over. It used to be called the currency debate. It's time we as Americans drove the big idea of the currency debate into the presidential election, that we do not allow Republican candidates to take big ideas and make them small ideas, or any for that matter. The goal of our work here today, and you've heard from some great speakers and some brilliant men, is to take their brilliance out of the 4 walls of academia, the 4 walls of the Princeton Club, and into Main Street. And that's up to you guys, to bring the currency debate to the forefront of American thinking. Because as you listen to Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and the rest of them talk about the widening income gap, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, they'll tell you what George Gilder references, that they think capitalism on its last legs. But it's not free market capitalism that's driving the widening income gap. It's the destruction of the American dollar. The founders understood that. We understand. We need to drive this into the presidential race. We need to make our leaders have a big idea for the future of American money. And we're going to do this in some pretty unique ways. You know, when I was brought on to do this project last year, I watched out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Every year, the Federal Reserve System has this thing called the Jackson Hole Symposium. And they all go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They all tout what a wonderful job they're doing. How great things are. And last year, you had Mario Draghi there from Europe, and they were all talking about. But last year, about a dozen of these protesters showed up. They claimed they were average Americans. And they showed up outside of the Jackson Hole Symposium. And they, for a bunch of average Americans, here's what they asked for. They want a seat at the table in monetary policy. They want to determine who the Fed governors are. They thought it would be a good idea if the president nominated the presidents of the Federal Reserve System. These are just average Americans. Those average Americans got as much press around the world as the Fed system did. So I thought, well, wait a minute. Why don't we challenge them? Not saying we want more destruction of the American dollar, but let's challenge those Fed policies toe-to-toe. So August 27th, 28th, and 29th, the American Principles Project will conduct our own monetary policy, our own currency debate in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, directly across the Jackson Hole Street in Wyoming. And we are bringing the best and the brightest minds in free market economics, including George Gilder, including Sean Filer, and others. And we have partnered with the Atlas Network, with the Heritage Foundation. Jim DeMint will be with us as a speaker, with England's Cobden Center, their sort of version of Heritage Foundation, with leaders from Spain and France and around the world who understand the importance of money, of the true value of sound money, what sound money means. And we're going to take them on for the first time in their history in a way they've never seen before. On your tables is a brochure. I hope you'll take the time to come out to Jackson Hole and join us for this historic event. It's not an easy place to get to, but it's a beautiful place to go. And this will be a historic moment in American history. We are determined that the American Principles Project, thanks to the leadership of Sean Filer, thanks to the intellect of George Gilder and the inspiration of Steve Forbes and the longtime leadership of Jim Grant, to drive the currency debate back into the forefront of American thinking. It's critical to the future of our nation's economic growth. It's critical to establishing true economic prosperity and making America the world's leader in economic growth once again. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope to see you in Jackson Hole.
Okay, that's the end of our program. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.